My name is Pablo Yañez. I am a senior program manager here at the Studio for Teaching and Learning Innovation. I deal with data, innovation, and technology. I'm also in charge of our community programming. Today we're going to try something new for our Quick Bite. We've got Kate and Scott from the Charles Center. This is the first time we've done a collaboration with the Charles Center. They're one of our great partners here on campus. And they're going to be talking about guiding students in the research grant proposal process. Research is an integral part of education at William & Mary, and the Charles Center runs a tight ship with their student grants. So I think that, let's see, we are at, yeah, we're getting there. So I think we're about up to 10 people here. So I'm going to hand it over to Kate. Thank you, Kate. And again, just one quick mention. The point of Quick Bites in general, today as well, is that attendees should walk away at the end of the session with some skills or knowledge that get them on the ground and running right after the session so that they can do something. It might be something in your classroom. It might be something in your teaching or research. And so this fits into that Quick Bite model that we do. Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pablo. We're really grateful to STLI to give us this platform to just share more about the Charles Center Summer Research Grants and specifically how you all can help your student put together the best application possible. So my name is Kate Patterson. I work in the Charles Center as the undergraduate research program administrator, and I also direct the Monroe Scholars Program. And I'm joined by one of our 3 faculty fellows who assist us with a lot of help with the grant application and review process. Dr. Scott Ickes from kinesiology. And then in the audience, we also are joined by Dr. Leah Shaw from mathematics, who is another of our faculty fellows. And then I also want to give credit to Lori Jacobson, the director of the Writing Communication Center, for her assistance with putting this presentation together. We did a similar workshop for the students who are applying back in December. So definitely a lot of helpful info came from her. To go ahead and start us off. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the grants we are specifically talking about through the Charles Center, and hopefully some of your students have approached you about mentoring them as they are applying for some of these grants. But just to give a quick overview, we have the Charles Center Summer Research Grant, and this is a $4,000 grant to fund the equivalent of 7 full-time weeks of student research over the summer that is faculty mentored. It can be any student class year as long as they're not graduating in the spring, and can be for really any discipline on campus of research. The honors fellowships are $5,000 for 10 full-time weeks of research during the summer, and that is for rising juniors who are planning on doing a senior thesis in the fall. So we kind of think of it as like a head start to that senior thesis project. And so some of you might be mentoring or being the advisor on record for some of these rising senior thesis students. So that would be a great opportunity for them. Due just a little bit later, we have the Monroe Scholars applications. So we have a $1,500 grant for first-year Monroe Scholars. That's for 3 weeks of research. It's really just kind of meant to be a kind of pilot, first-time, short-term research project. And then our sophomore and junior Monroe Scholars are essentially guaranteed as part of their program a $4,000 grant for 7 weeks of full-time research, very similar in structure to the Charles Center Summer Research Grant. So just want to kind of lay the groundwork. These are the grants we're talking about, and we'll be discussing the application for these specifically. All right. So moving on along, just to share what is kind of the application made up of. These aren't all the components of the application, but these are really the key ones. And I have bolded some of the areas where direct mentorship from you would be probably the most helpful for that student. So of course, the abstract, you may have students where this is the first time they're ever writing that. So, providing what's the background for this research, what's the research question, what strategies are they going to use to address that question or issue, and then what's going to be the projected impact. The methodology, which is going to be their plan for the summer, what strategies are they going to use, kind of what's the timeline of how are they going to carry out this project in a feasible span of time. Resources, so this could be anything from databases to library collections, archives, materials in your lab. So that's definitely something you can help inform them about. Institutional compliance approval, so that would be things like IRB, IACUC, the IBC protocols, just making sure their research is ethical and is getting the appropriate committee approvals. We'll ask if they've applied for approval from any of those committees that they need to get that approval from, and they will need it by the time they're getting actually funded by us. So definitely something to bear in mind and think ahead about. And then finally, the faculty recommendation form. It's not a letter of recommendation, it is a form that you'll fill out, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And thank you, Scott, for dropping the link to the grant application webpage in the chat. There's a lot of great information on there. There's links to sample responses that students can look at to help with their writing and their structure. There's an FAQ, so definitely check that out. So to talk about some more specifics about your involvement, as they kind of work their way through the proposal. So really having your assistance through the very incubation of that research idea up through the final draft of that proposal is, extraordinarily helpful. So there might be different ways, students will approach you about the project or different ways to go about it. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that as well. But maybe it's the student's own topic they came up with, but then they've approached you to get some guidance and assistance and mentorship as they go forward with developing it into a research project. Or they might be joining you in more of the research assistant capacity where you already have your ongoing research in your lab and they're part of that group or working closely with you on some kind of aspect of that they're taking ownership of and carrying out the research for this summer. So the proposal should definitely be all the students' own writing, but they are very, very strongly encouraged to share their drafts with you, get feedback on their responses as they work through those different short answer questions on the proposal. And they will be asked kind of how they collaborated with you to create the proposal. And then on the faculty recommendation form, you'll also be asked, how you mentored the student in creating the proposal and what role you played in that. More about the recommendation form. So that is a mix of multiple choice and short answer questions. So that is asking things like, how long have you known the student and in what capacity? The main kind of meatiest part of that is what is noteworthy about this student that might not be apparent from their transcript. So what we're really looking to know is, does the student have your full support as they embark on this project? And do you feel like they're up for the task of carrying out this research? So to speak a little bit about the reviewers, moving on to kind of the evaluation side of things, and then I'm going to pass it over to Scott to take over. We have the Undergraduate Research Committee, which is made up of 60 or so faculty members from all different disciplines on campus. And so each proposal is evaluated by 3 different faculty reviewing independently, so they don't see each other's ratings or scores. So they are going to get 3 reviewers. So say maybe it's a biology project. So they'll have a reviewer from biology. They'll have a reviewer from an adjacent area in that same, area 1, 2, or 3. So that could perhaps be a chemist or a physicist. And then someone from a completely different field who might not have any kind of background knowledge about this research. So say maybe a history or a philosophy professor to kind of get that well-rounded assessment of their proposal. So Scott, I will hand it over to you for further comments on this topic and let you carry on.
Okay, thank you, Kate. So, are we on the next slide? Some of the main areas that are evaluated by faculty, and as Kate mentioned, people from within the department or within the subject area and outside the subject area are reviewing this proposal. So that's important in terms of the clarity of the proposal. So the project, and all good mentors, I think, help students to understand that they need to convey the essence of the project to a lay audience that doesn't have technical expertise in the field. And so that's where the clarity of the proposal comes in, that it conveys the big impact and picture and the sort of so what question to the readership, even if it's a technical advancement in the field. It doesn't have to sort of be like solving a big world issue kind of proposal, but the advancing the field in some way should be relevant, and the research question should be well articulated and obvious to a lay person. A few times in the past, there's been some frustration and maybe some challenges for students who've written really strong proposals from their disciplines with really strong technical guidance for mentors, but maybe not as good of a job at kind of modifying that language to be approachable to a lay audience. And that's where we've seen some, really good proposals not necessarily succeed the way they might have if that language weren't simplified and clarified. It's really important to convey a sense of preparation. So sort of the sooner the better. That students and faculty have started working on these as is realistic. We understand that people are busy and faculty members are being approached by students at various points before the application deadline. But students should be well prepared. They should have coursework or research background, either formal or informal, to prepare them for their proposed work. And the faculty members will get to look at the transcript. But a lot of that comes through in the application where students are saying in their own words sort of why they're interested in the topic and what has led them to both being prepared and interested in the topic. The proposal presentation is really important. This is a brief video presentation. Is that correct, Kate? Now we all do brief videos for each candidate. And from a reviewer standpoint, these have been very, very good across the board, and students seem to do excellent in this. But this is, about a 2 to 3 minute summation of the project where students are really kind of explaining and selling their idea to the reviewers. And this is just something that the mentor can coach on and review as well before students submit. The methodology and feasibility really go hand in hand. This is where we want to see the project's plan, the timeline, and the research steps. This was similar to a method section for a scientific proposal, and for people coming from the arts and humanities, this is sort of like the timeline and scope of work and plan of action for the project. It could be visiting certain museums or collecting information, going to a library to collect data, analyzing that data, conducting interviews perhaps, as long as the process and methods are clear. And that, of course, links to the feasibility, where many times, the area, as we can all guess, as faculty mentors, sometimes students, maybe overreach, and maybe faculty mentors overreach in terms of the scope of the project. And a few projects have been kind of dinged or downgraded a little bit just because what's being proposed in a summer may be too ambitious. I've never really seen too many programs where it's been under ambitious or not reaching enough. It's usually on the other side where a project needs to be kind of reasonably ambitious given the budget in 7 week duration with some lead up time going into that. And then, of course, and we are a liberal arts university, so we don't expect students to only do projects in their discipline or academic major, but we want to make sure that the reviewers want to make sure that the project meets students' intellectual trajectory. Great. Next slide. So,
is it okay if I ask a quick question, or should I hold off?
Sure, yeah. Please, go ahead.
So with the previous slide on the evaluation criteria, one of the big challenges I've had in advising students is trying to figure out exactly how to best define a reasonable scope for the timeline, because in my experience, most students don't take the full 7 weeks. It's usually end up being like 6 weeks because of the lag at the end of school. So on one hand, I want to have a proposal that is competitive in terms of its ambition, but on the other hand, because it tends to be more like 6 weeks, isn't like overkill.
Yeah, I would say you can sort of under promise and over deliver. I think it's really kind of up to the mentor and the student to come up with that. And I don't think reviewers really fully understand necessarily the nitty-gritty of what a reasonable pace or ambitious output would be for particular projects. But I think so long as it seems like there's a proposed timeline that seems realistic, reasonable, and that there's some type of output at the end of the duration of the project, I think that would be a successful way to convey that. So if you know as a mentor that in reality things tend to, students are able to accomplish a little less than they sometimes propose or that you might like to see, I'd say it's okay to just sort of tone things down a little bit. But we want students to do mostly that 7 week full-time commitment.
Thank you.
Sure. We can go to the next slide. So one of the key things about is writing for a general audience. So, we do want to see, technical expertise, and that students and mentors are definitely advancing the field and using some technical expertise in the methods. On the other hand, these are projects that will need to be conveyed to a broader audience. Students will present at the undergraduate research symposium. So the proposal is a great opportunity to kind of answer the big question. And we've seen some really good examples of this across the disciplines where technical science, especially quantitative science or technical life science questions, can be conveyed in appropriate terms to help people understand the big picture. And it's a good cartoon here if you want to see how to get people to understand the big picture. And I think you can use sort of students do this, I think, well in their videos where they kind of hook the audience. And I think getting that sort of hook at the beginning can go a long way, even if it gets really specific and really, if you lose people a little bit in the methods and details, the fact that, Aiden, I know you do work in particle development. And so I think helping to create particles that can help solve issues related to disability and health issues, that'll be a nice sort of link to then get into things that are, maybe over most people's heads or beyond their level of expertise. Cool. So yeah, we want to make sure that there's a setup. I like to tell people that, research proposals should follow sort of an hourglass sequence where we set up the stage. We're sort of focused big on the outside at the outset, big picture, the so what question, And then we kind of start narrowing that in with some background research, stating a problem in a research question becomes more specific, more closer to the middle of that hourglass, and it gets very specific with the research strategy. And then we kind of blow out again and focus out or zoom out again, I think, on the significance of the research and why the topic is worth exploring. And oftentimes that can, in this context, connect to the student's academic and personal trajectory and why this matters for them and for the field. So you can kind of see an example of this from our chemistry colleagues. We see in yellow here the setup of ROS species, what they are and why they're important for aging diseases and neurodegenerative disease. Then the problem here identifies the gap in the research. Here we've had the Landino lab identify themselves as sort of what the lab is interested in, what's the research question or problem at hand, and then the strategy here is basically another way of saying the aim or objective of the study, and then impact. And for those of you who publish or who write proposals for NSF and NIH and other scientific agencies, of course, this would be a very similar format, but also in the arts and the humanities. I think that this format is fairly robust across the disciplines, making sure that we just kind of, again, follow that zoom in and zoom out. Cool. Great. And then, the feasible plan aspect is really emphasizing the questions of how, where, and when. Where will the project be conducted? How many hours will be spent? Is the data and the data sources, are those available and accessible given the budget and time frame of the research? And again, this is really whether, I think the realistic nature, it's really important to communicate this, whether the project, drifts a little bit from this in execution or becomes a little bit less ambitious or even more ambitious is sort of after the fact. But I think in the research proposal process, the sort of under promise, over deliver, making sure that there's a feasible plan and that the budget, kind of goes nicely and corresponds nicely with what's being proposed. Again, over feasible or over ambitious tends to be dinged more than under ambitious, but students, are motivated. So feasibility is a big criteria. And interestingly, apart from the clarity, becomes an area where projects sometimes get a bit of a lower score. Next slide. It's great if a project can fit along with a mentor's existing project, but this is not always the case. But this is sort of one model. And so model one is where a mentor and a student have been working together, or maybe they formed a relationship after a class or during a course, and the student wants to correspond, do some research that goes under the umbrella of or corresponds to a mentor's existing project. So the mentor provides resources, ensures the students have background knowledge. The mentor would be a reviewer of the methodology. The student would still write a draft application and get feedback from the mentor. Just because it's part of a mentor's existing project doesn't mean that the mentor does all the work. And the Charles Center grants are really not supposed to be just simple ways to fund student labor. We want to make sure that the student is an intellectual has intellectual ownership over the proposed research. Nevertheless, this is a model where the student is closely tying the work in the proposed study to the mentor's existing project. A second example would be where we have a student-led project, and we've probably seen these again, and sometimes these are more common in different disciplines. Sometimes the arts and humanities might see more of this than others. And this takes some discretion from the mentor about one's willingness to supervise a project that's more student initiated and driven. These can be very fulfilling projects, but they sometimes take a different level of buy-in and supervision from a mentor. Nevertheless, this is a successful pathway that students can go, where the student really approaches a mentor with an idea, the student's done some background research, and the mentor provides some expertise based on their field and discipline, and gives substantial feedback on the feasibility and project approach. as the same in the same vein as before, the student would still draft the application and receive mentor feedback and convey that to a non-expert audience. Both of these are successful pathways for students to write these grant proposals. Okay, so Kate's going to talk about some additional resources.
Yeah, and I know we definitely want to leave time for questions, so I'll be very brief on this and then just drop some links in the chat. So we definitely encourage students to take their drafts to the Writing and Communication Center to get feedback. That's a great way to get feedback from a non-specialist audience in particular. And then we have 2 upperclassmen undergraduate research ambassadors. These students have office hours within the Charles Center, so students can come by and just get their questions answered about applying for research grants, because both of these students have been successful in doing that themselves and getting some additional feedback. So that is our presentation, and we'd love to answer any questions that anybody has at this point.